What is cracking, everybody? You're back with Mr. Berger. Tonight we're taking a look at another Splashyard deck, and this is actually a Giant Skeleton Splashyard deck. I really like the Giant Skeleton. Forever he's been one of those kind of off-meta, but still really viable cards. I feel like he fits into a lot of decks, and he has huge defensive potential, but there's generally just more viable options for similar elixir costs that play a similar role, so people don't generally pick him. However, he is a really solid card. He's been really good in most metas, just kind of low play, low usage rates, kind of underused, and he is absolutely a defensive powerhouse. So tonight's deck, it's not the current #1 meta deck, which I believe I shared not too long ago. That would be, the Lava Hounds, Goblin Cage, at least at the time of this recording, that's like the top deck. But this deck actually does pretty well against that deck. You got a lot of defensive potential, and you have a huge amount of splash synergy. So Splashyard is back. It's very viable once again. Dark Prince being one of those cards that's also very viable once again. He was buffed, I think not in the latest patch, but like 2 balance changes ago. They happen so often now that I don't even remember. I can't keep track of them anymore. But he was buffed recently, so he's a pretty solid card again, and I definitely recommend him in some decks. He's not super OP like he was at one point, so you're not going to be seeing him in every single deck, like when there's just one meta card that's super strong, think like Royal Recruits when they were first released. Like, they were just in literally every deck. Dark Prince was like that for a while, and Valkyrie was too. They were just really, really strong for a while. So he doesn't have that same power that he did at one point, but he's still a really good card, and he fits well into decks that, give him some sort of spot in synergy, and that is, really good in this deck. That he fits really well into this deck because he synergizes really well with all the splash damage that you have. So, I mean, you've just got so much of it. You have so much splash synergy, and I know I'm repeating that over and over again, but that's because it's really important, and I really want to point that out here. And if you don't really know what I mean by that, the word synergy basically just means, things that work together really well. They synergize. It's not just a bunch of random cards that don't have any, effects that pair well together. A lot of the cards in this deck are handpicked because they work really well with each other. Look at that defensive potential right there, and I want to point that out. Use the Giant Skeleton Tornado combo, especially on defense. The Giant Skeleton's death damage from his bomb destroys just about anything. Now, it's not going to destroy a Golem or a P.E.K.K.A, but as far as support troops, it'll destroy any wizard or musketeer, flying machine, anything like that. And it just does an insane amount of damage. I don't know the exact number off the top of my head, but I'm sure that you can look it up if you're so inclined and you're really interested. So remember that, use the Giant Skeleton, and that's just one example of the splash energy that you do have in this deck. You got a whole ton of it. He's your main tank, and he has it too. So it's a really, really, really splashyardy deck. The only card that I'm looking at that doesn't quite fit would be Mega Minion, but that's just because Mega Minion is one of those universal cards that you can fit into any deck. The role that it plays, it's only 3 elixir, it's tanky, doesn't die to fireball, it's got high damage, high DPS, takes out support units. It's just a super universal card that you can use in almost any archetype, but almost every other single card in this deck synergizes really well with that tornado. So let's look at it specifically, guys. Baby Dragon splash damage, Dark Prince splash damage, Ice Wizard splash damage, Poison in theory, you know what I mean? Sorry, that's 4, right? It does splash damage. I mean, it does an area of effect damage. So on top of all of that, you've got, the Graveyard, which it doesn't particularly have that AoE damage, but it synergizes really well with everything else, and the fact that it covers an area on the map and that you can put the poison on top of it to clear the way for it, so it just fits really well into this deck. The Mega Minion, if you want to replace it, I've seen decks with mini P.E.K.K.A in there and stuff. You could put another splash troop in there, but I mean, that'd be a little bit overkill, not really necessary. It is good to have that one heavy hitting single unit targeting troop. So that's kind of why you want to have that Mega Minion in there. So let's talk about the playstyle of the deck itself. It's very defensive. It's very much a control deck. You really want to play heavy defense, and you don't want to go hard on the offense, except for pretty much in 2 situations. One, when you get a really heavy elixir advantage or some sort of opportunity to push really hard. And secondly, once you're in double elixir, you could be a little bit more aggressive with your graveyard and with your pushing. But generally, you're not going offensive a whole lot. Because all it really takes, and I may reiterate this too because it's really important, all it really takes to get their tower is one big push. You just want to get that one massive push, decimate that tower. You can drop a tower in like 5 seconds with this deck from full health. All you got to do is get something tanking the tower. You got to get the graveyard down, let the skeletons swarm up without your opponent having a counter, or by immediately clearing out their counter with something like your poison, and their tower will drop so fast. So don't try to be aggressive with it too much. Now, there are going to be particular times where you can be aggressive. If they say put a golem in the back, you may want to like Dark Prince in the opposite lane. Or especially like if you're going up against Lava Hound, which you will be a lot in this current meta, then they don't have, like your Dark Prince, it can't attack air. So Lava Hound is useless against Lava Hound. It's useless against Baby Dragon. It's useless against Inferno Dragon, Mega Minion, all these cards that are common in the current meta Lava Hound decks. Even Balloon if they are running Balloon. So you can go aggressive in that situation in the opposite lane with like your Dark Prince or maybe even your Giant Skeleton. Usually don't use them at the bridge, but in some situations you may need to pull it off. But for the most part, this is a very defensive deck. Now this is going up against a Balloon deck, I believe. Yeah, it is. Not particularly super meta, but it's one that you will see. It's a variation of the one that's been popular recently. So anyway, let's talk about the defensive potential. Like I said, I often won't push until 2 times elixir, till double elixir. If I am pushing before then, it's because I have some sort of a big lead, some sort of an opportunity. But you have so much splash synergy, you have so much defensive potential. You really want to just hang tight and, you know, counter what they've got and just build up your elixir. And then when you get the opportunity to go in with a push, then that's when you want to, you know, kind of invest everything into one massive push and counter them. Now, when you do graveyard, you're always going to be graveyarding with some sort of a tank in front of it. And I want to talk about this briefly now in case it slips my mind later, I forget it. So you have a lot of options in this deck. The 2 most obvious ones are going to be Dark Prince and Giant Skeleton. Now, Giant Skeleton's mostly used on defense, but he can, you know, play defense, live, and then go on to offense. Or in some situations, like in double elixir, or like if they've pushed opposite lane, you can use him at the bridge and then try to graveyard with that. And then, you know, Giant Skeleton will tank the tower, and the graveyard will wreck the tower in theory. But generally, you're not just graveyarding by itself. You're almost always sending it in with some sort of a tank. So one of those two, even the Ice Wizard or the Mega Minion or the Baby Dragon will do, honestly. But mostly what you're going to be doing here is, you know, you're going to be playing defense really hard, and then on the counter push, once you've defended successfully enough times, inevitably, in theory, unless you're not playing too well or they're outplaying you or they've got some sort of a counter deck, you're going to be building up that elixir advantage over time, and you're going to be able to go in for a really massive counter push. Like so. He invested all that elixir in that balloon push there. All I needed was the Baby Dragon and the graveyard. I didn't even need the poison, honestly, because he didn't really put much down to counter it. He didn't have much elixir left. I saw the opportunity to go in for a massive counter push because my Baby Dragon was still alive. I was able to invest 5 elixir into the graveyard and then another 4 into the poison to, you know, kind of preemptively counter whatever he might put down. And I will talk about poison placement in a little bit here, but I just want to point out that you're almost never, unless it's really desperate or you've got a really good opportunity, you're just trying to get a little bit of chip damage, you're almost never going to be sending in that graveyard by itself. It's almost always going to be in, on a counter push once you've defended successfully, once you've got units surviving and they're going across the bridge. Once the Princess Tower is targeted onto those units, and you be it the Baby Dragon, the Mega Minion, the Dark Prince, whatever, then you put your graveyard down, or even a second or two before, so that once the skeletons start spawning, because they don't spawn right away, it takes like a second or two. Once they start spawning, the unit will, in theory, have crossed the bridge already and will be able to, you know, do the tanking job for the skeletons in the graveyard. Now, try to feel out what their counters are for your graveyard. You're generally not going to be using it early on, so you'll have a lot of time to feel out their deck. You'll know, okay, this guy's running Lava Loon, so generally to counter my graveyard, he's probably going to be doing, Skeleton Army, or Guards, or whatever. So sometimes you may want to, like, not even play it the first time. Wait to see what they have, and then counter accordingly. So, like, you could send in the graveyard, or send in, like, the Baby Dragon in the graveyard with it, and then you see, like, okay, he's got Guards. That's what he's going to use to counter my graveyard. If you don't know it already, right? Or maybe he's got multiple counters. And you might think, okay, what is this particular player most likely to do? What are they likely to defend with? Are they going to use their goblins? or are they going to use their guards, or are they going to use their musketeer, whatever. And you need to be able to poison accordingly and try to clip and destroy whatever units they might have on defense. So the main thing that I'm getting at here is you don't always just want to place the poison down predictively. You're not necessarily always going to be sending in the graveyard and then poisoning on top of it. And yes, that's a great play. And if you're new to graveyard, the reason is because then if they put down that skeleton army or musketeer, whatever it is, the poison will destroy that instantly if it's like a skeleton army. And it clears the path for, the full duration of the graveyard, essentially. It's like 8 seconds. And then you have this free range for your graveyard to just do work. But the problem with doing it predictively, especially early on, or if they, switch up their plays and they place something in another spot, is you may end up sending that poison in alone, and all you're going to be doing is doing a little bit of chip damage to their tower, because none of your skeletons are connecting to the tower because they put their counter somewhere else, or they used a different counter that's not going to die to the poison. So you really want to kind of feel out what they've got for a counter, and then poison accordingly. You don't always just want to send it in predictively. Now, once you figured out, okay, he's skeleton army the first 2 times that I graveyarded. So then in that case, yeah, okay, I'm just going to poison right on top of the graveyard. And it'll clear out the skeleton army. And then he does it, and bam, that skeleton army is dead. All of a sudden, his tower is gone because he doesn't have another counter in hand, and he's not reacting fast enough, or whatever, right? So that's a good situation to do that. Ooh, crazy lightning value on his part there. But let's say that he's always countering your graveyard with, say, a musketeer or like spear goblins in the corner, something a little bit further away, not right on top of the graveyard. Then you're going to want to actually try to clip that musketeer or whatever it be with the poison as well. If you're poisoning right on top of the graveyard, right on top of the princess tower, right? And his musketeer's off to the side, shooting your skeletons and destroying them fast enough, or like a magic archer or whatever attacks really fast, they can destroy them quickly. Dart goblin, for example, right? And it's just shutting them down completely. There's no point in doing the poison right on top of the tower. Do that poison stagger to the side so that you clip the tower and the dart goblin that's like all the way in the center of the arena, right? Feel free to move that poison around, because either way, guys, even if you're not doing it right on top, you're still getting that value. Because if you're able to destroy like a 4 elixir support unit like a musketeer, or 5 elixir like a wizard, that's a positive elixir trade for you just by doing that poison, plus the chip damage on the tower. Now if it's a dart goblin, yeah, it's a negative trade, but you've taken out their counter from the equation, which gives your skeletons from your graveyard a much better opportunity to get in there and wreak havoc and do some serious damage. So like I mentioned, always try to clip whatever support units they have. Put down your poison, get value from it. Don't necessarily use it predictively every time, but once you've figured out what their likely counter is, then yeah, maybe predictively use it. Keep in mind, though, if you do place it down and you counter their counter a bunch of times, if they're any good, they're probably going to switch it up and put the counter somewhere else or delay it or do something else to counter it. So just remember that. Feel out their counters and see what your options are and respond accordingly. And again, guys, even if you don't get any value or any damage from the skeletons, if you're able to clip that musketeer, that wizard, whatever it is, anything that's equal or greater value than 4 for the poison, you essentially get free value on their tower because of the chip damage to the tower. You take their unit out of the equation, and if it's a higher elixir cost, it's a positive elixir trade for you. Now, guys, remember to be patient with this deck. You've got a lot of defensive potential here. It's not a cycle deck, it's not a bridge spam deck, it's not even a beatdown deck. It's definitely a control deck. It's a Splashyard deck. It's a graveyard deck, right? And most graveyard decks are played relatively similarly, this one being no exception. Play defensively. You see there, the only reason I used the Dark Prince at the bridge was I'm just trying to get some value out of that Ice Wizard. But on top of that, I see that he gianted in the opposite lane, so I'm able to aggressively push in my lane so that he isn't able to support that giant too much. And I am going to get a little bit of damage on my left tower here, but the Mega Minion's going to do a good job of finishing it off. And look at that Giant Skeleton value. Finishes off the E-Wiz, practically destroys the Valkyrie, brings her low enough so that the tower can finish her off. So you'll see I'm playing very passively, very defensively. I'm often cycling things in the back. I don't know for sure what his counter is yet at this point. I see that he has a lightning, so I do need to keep that in mind when I'm cycling my things in the back. Doesn't fully destroy the baby dragon, but gets some good value on my tower and brings the baby dragon to really low health. Now, if he does it on like the Ice Wiz, it's going to be a bad trade on his part because that's only 3 elixir for his 6. And again, I'm using the Prince, the Dark Prince, a little bit aggressively, just trying to get some value with that Ice Wizard. And I also know that he's running a Giant deck, so I don't want to allow him to get like a massive beatdown push going. I want to be able to, you know, counter, and sometimes in order to do so, you got to be a little bit aggressive. And here I just go in for the graveyard. I see that the Giant Skeleton's still alive. I see that it's going to live for a few seconds longer. And he zaps my skeletons. Whenever they zap or bar, barrel, or log, or whatever it's pretty good for you, because that's 2 elixir and their light spell that's out of the equation, and they don't have any remaining value for that. It takes out whatever skeletons are there, yeah, but if any more are spawning after that, then those skeletons are going to do, you know, a ton of damage, especially if they got like that Giant Skeleton in front tanking for them like they did there. And then, you know, he's 2 elixir out, and he doesn't have his light spell for whatever else he might need it for. So at this point, I know that I'm going to lose the left tower, but it's not a big deal. I'm going in aggressively in the right here with the Giant Skeleton again. And again, this is one of those opportunities where, first of all, I do see that I can afford to be a little bit more aggressive. And secondly, we're in double elixir time now. So that's why I'm doing things like, you know, just playing the Giant Skeleton at the bridge with the Baby Dragon behind it. Trying to get my cycle going good, trying to keep the pressure up. Again, I know I talk about playing defensively, but it is all very situational. In this situation, I saw, okay, left tower is as good as gone. It's 177 health. So what I want to do is just let it drop and put the pressure on the right. Try to finish off that right tower, get some value on it early on. Now here's the defensive potential. Got the Baby Dragon, got the Ice Wizard, got the Tornado all in one. And just look at that value there, guys. It splashes everything down. Now it's not too great here, but I mean that Valkyrie, that Giant, and that Baby Dragon up there took a ton of damage from all that splash synergy there. Here I have the Dark Prince still alive because he does live through that lightning. So I send in the graveyard. We're in double elixir, so I'm a little bit more comfortable just kind of putting down the poison preemptively. So I'm thinking, okay, he's going to do something to counter it. He doesn't really, so he gets a little bit of value on the Lumberjack, but at this point, I can almost poison cycle his tower. And again, with the defensive Tornado combo there, it's a perfect example. You got the Ice Wizard, you got the Baby Dragon, massive splash damage, massive slow. You Tornado everything together, it's as good as gone. Those two things are still alive, so rather than graveyarding right away, I get us a big tank. I put the Giant Skeleton down aggressively at the bridge, and then I graveyard. And at this point, I can poison the graveyard because I know it's going to get some value on the Lumberjack, and it's also going to get a little bit more chip damage onto his tower. And I know that I only need like maybe 2 more poisons left, but I need to play heavy defense. And again, all I had is the Dark Prince, but that's enough to pull everything together, get splash damage on the Valkyrie, the Lumberjack, the, Giant, and pull the Baby Dragon far enough away so that it retargets onto my units. I know he's going to try to lightning cycle me at this point, so I need to be a little bit aggressive, because if he gets a few more lightnings off, then I'm going to lose that tower for sure. But of course, I can't allow him to do something like sneak a Lumberjack there, because then I'll lose it as well. So I use the Giant Skeleton on defense. At this point, I know that I just need a few more swings off, so I go in for the graveyard and the poison, even though the Giant Skeleton hasn't technically tanked for the tower yet. Get a little bit of value there by chipping away at the E-Wiz as well, and I get it so that his tower is only within 1 more poison range to be killed. So all I got to do is cycle back to poison at this point in this good game. There's no way he's going to lightning me like 3 times, which is what he'll need before then. So I just, rather than, you know, investing into the graveyard at this point, I just I just poison right there in the front to clear the way for the Dark Prince and slowly but surely finish off that tower. So that was a nice little play-by-play there, guys. I think we got some great examples of how to play the deck. Let's go ahead and jump on into another replay and keep talking strategy. Oh, these last few replays are going to be good ones, guys. This one right here is against 2.6 Hog Cycle. So very classic, timeless, well-known archetype that you guys are probably quite familiar with. So I may talk a little bit about the decision-making and the play-by-plays here, but I want to cover and touch up a little bit more on the strategy behind the deck. So as I was talking about before I got way into talking about that last match, you do want to be patient. You can easily take out that tower in one massive push. As you saw there, that particular deck, it took me a few littler pushes, but I was able to eventually take out that tower. But in other replays, you have seen, you know, I've just gone in with 1 graveyard and that tower is as good as gone. So wait for that opportunity. Don't be too aggressive with it. Don't waste it because it's 5 full elixir. I mean, that's a lot of elixir. And if you don't get any damage on the tower or just 1 or 2 swings, it's not really worth it. Unless you're just trying to finish off the tower if it's got a sliver of health left, but that's a different scenario, right? So, you know, play defensively, be patient, use it when you got that opportunity. Now, if a Giant Skeleton does manage to connect to a tower, that's great. the tower will take a ton of damage. His bomb does an insane amount of damage. It takes out like half the tower's health or something crazy like that. I mean, it's like letting a golem connect to the tower. It's just an inevitable amount of damage within the next few seconds. Even if the golem doesn't get any swings, any auto attacks onto the tower, he's going to do the death damage. And that death damage is pretty serious to a tower. So the Giant Skeleton is absolutely the same, if not even more so. His death damage from his bomb will absolutely decimate a tower. However, especially if you're going up against a good cycle player like this guy who's got a very fast deck, they're never going to allow that Giant Skeleton to connect to that tower. And here I'm a little bit scared because I don't have too much to defend, but it actually works out really well. The Hog Rider gets 2 swings off onto the tower, but the Tornado and the Mega Minion do a great job of finishing everything up. So that was really good. And against this deck, since he's got a lot of weak units, I can counter it pretty well with all my splash stuff. But the thing is, since it's a 2.6 Hog Cycle deck, very high, fast-paced, cycly kind of style of gameplay, then he really keeps me on my toes. And again, props to this guy. He's pretty good at playing the deck, and it doesn't allow me to necessarily play my deck how it's most ideally meant to be played. I might not be able to get all my splash units up before I have to use the Tornado or something like that. Here I see an opportunity to go in with the Graveyard, and you'll notice that each of these Graveyards are getting a good chunk of damage off onto his tower, even though they may not be finishing it off. It might not be that one big push we're looking for. It's getting a little bit of chip damage, and that may be what you need to do in certain games. This guy's really good, really fast-paced, right, with the cycle deck, really keeping me on my toes. So I need to make sure to just, when I get the opportunity, get that chip damage in, get a little bit of damage at a time, and then slowly finish it off eventually. Of course, there's always going to be the chance that I just play defense, and then get one massive push. But again, this guy's kind of keeping me on my toes, not really allowing me to do that, so I'm taking the chip damage route instead. So generally, you're going to be using the Giant Skeleton on defense. Again, you may see me, and you have seen me often in these replays, use him at the bridge, and that's just very situational. Not necessarily always the best play. You're more likely to be using him on defense. But like here, again, it's all situational. We're in double elixir. I needed another tank. I had the Dark Prince and the Ice Wizard going in, and I knew that they were going to die if I didn't have anything else tanking for them. So I sent the Giant Skeleton in just to soak up that damage. And see, it actually worked out in that case, right? But again, double elixir, bunch of units alive, going in for the Hail Mary win at the very end there. So that was very situational. In most cases, you're going to be saving him for defense. Now, once you've used him and he's died, again, you saw this earlier, use that Tornado, man. Again, if you're going up against like 2.6, you might have to use the Tornado to pull units to the center, pull the Hog Rider to the center every time. But if you have the opportunity to use the Tornado on defense, pair it with the Giant Skeleton Bomb, it'll decimate pretty much anything. It does an insane amount of damage, as I mentioned earlier. So that's really what makes him a huge defensive card. Even if you use him in front of like a Giant, and then the Musketeer and Wizard behind the Giant destroy him, then they're going to walk into that bomb as long as there's nothing else distracting them before then. And then, your 6 Elixir Giant Skeleton, even though it didn't get much damage off from its auto attacks, the bomb gives it huge value because it took out, 9 Elixirs worth or whatever. Plus it did damage to the Giant, right? I mean, it's insane. Even to tank units, it might not finish them off, but it'll do a good chunk of damage to them. Now, for opening moves and card replacements, I like to touch up on these briefly on most of my videos, so let's talk about that. And then we're going to run through one last replay after this. This is a pretty classic Royal Giant Furnace deck with Lightning, by the way. The last replay that we got here is that top meta Lava Hound Miner, what is it, the new guy, the Goblin Bruiser, Goblin Bruiser? Brawler? Whatever he's called. Brawler, right? In this game, yeah. The Goblin Cage guy. That deck. We'll run through that replay at the end there. So for opening moves, I like to cycle my cheaper cards in the back. You have a lot of options in this deck, honestly, looking at it. I got Dark Prince that I'll cycle, I got Mega Minion, I got Ice Wizard, I got Baby Dragon. Like, these are all really good cards to cycle in the back. It's not a Musketeer, it's not a Wizard, they're not going to die to a Fireball Zap, anything like that. It's not, a Goblin Gang that's going to die to a Log. Pretty much all of these are going to live through most things. Mega Minion and Ice Wizard only cost 3, and they both will live through a Fireball, which gives you good value there, because the Fireball costs 4, and your unit is still alive. Dark Prince, he's good. He builds up his charge. He's got the shield, so if they rocket or lightning or fireball him, he'll still be alive. He'll live through that first spell and go on to gain some value. Baby Dragon, also slow, beefy, splash damage, just a good card to cycle in the back. Giant Skeleton, I wouldn't generally open with him unless you don't have much more of an option. If you find yourself with Giant Skeleton, Poison, Graveyard, and Tornado, for example, that might be your only option. You could cycle him in the back, you could be aggressive and put him at the bridge and try to catch your opponent off guard, or you could always just hang tight, wait to see what your opponent does, and counter accordingly, but that's not how I personally play. So those would be my kind of suggestions as far as opening moves. Most ideal, I would say, would be like Mega Minion, maybe Ice Wizard, just because they're the cheapest. Honestly, Dark Prince and Baby Dragon are probably just as good, but generally you want to be cycling the cheaper units in the back if you're going to be doing that. And it is a very defensive deck, so you don't necessarily need to open aggressively. You're generally going to be opening defensively or countering whatever your opponent has. Alright guys, let's go ahead and jump on into that last replay. I will briefly skim over card replacements as we talk about how I countered this top meta deck right here. Alright guys, so really briefly for card replacements, let's just go down the list, top left to bottom right. If we're looking at Mega Minion, if you're looking at my interface here, you can see the card list right there. Mega Minion is very replaceable. You could replace it with like a Mini P.E.K.K.A., another support unit like Archers. It just kind of, you want something that can hit single units pretty hard. So that's why I say P.E.K.K.A., Mini P.E.K.K.A. You need something that attacks air in theory, although you do have other air counters in this deck. So you could go just something like Archers, which also cost 3. You could go Minions, which are kind of similar. And they're, Minions are cool because they don't die to Zap. They do die to Fireball, but it's a negative trade. They die to Arrows, and it's an equal trade, so that might be a good replacement. For Tornado, there's not really many replacements because it's such a unique card. But you could put like a defensive structure, maybe like a Tombstone, or even the Goblin Cage, because it's pretty meta right now. Or you could possibly put in, I guess you don't really have a light spell in there, so you could put in like a Log or Arrows, another light spell. For Baby Dragon, maybe just like a Wizard or an Executioner, another like mid-range support unit that has splash damage. For Poison, you really want the Poison in graveyard decks. My #1 replacement for Poison in a graveyard deck, or in most decks, would honestly be Freeze. Freeze was super meta for a long time, not super great right now, but in graveyard decks and balloon decks and things like that, it can still be really good. So, I would recommend Freeze. And, it works in the sense that it'll freeze all the units and allow your graveyard to do a ton of damage, allow the skeletons to do all the damage to their units rather than the poison clipping them and the skeletons doing damage to the tower. It'll work out pretty well. You just need to learn how to time it, wait until they put their units down, and then try to freeze whatever they have on top of their tower, and then let your skeletons go to town. For Dark Prince, you could go regular Prince or something like that. You could also do Bandit for the charge effect. You could also do like just Valkyrie would be great. Huge replacement for Dark Prince. Very similar role. Doesn't have the charge effect, but it's tanky and does splash damage. You could even do like a Royal Ghost if you like Royal Ghost. Only costs 3. Splash damage, relatively tanky. Has that really cool invisible effect. So it's definitely a good card. Good replacement there. For Giant Skeleton, you could put in something kind of tanky. You could go like a glass tank, a light tank, like a, Ice Golem. You could get something a little bit beefier, go like a giant and make it like a giant graveyard deck. But just look up other graveyard decks and see what kind of tanks they use. Honestly, just feel it out. This particular variation, it's a Splash NATO deck. It's a Splashyard deck, right? But with Giant Skeleton. So that's one of the major themes of this variation here. But if you do want to replace it, pretty much any other tanky unit, even like I said, like Valkyrie, or go double Prince, right? Do Dark Prince and Prince. It'll be great. For Ice Wizard, you could replace it with maybe like a Wizard or something like that. There's not too many things to replace it with. Maybe just another mid-range support unit like a Musketeer or Archers. Boy, I didn't even get to talking about the replay here, but you guys can see how I was able to counter that meta deck right there. And unfortunately, after this, I went like 6-0 with this deck, and then I lost a couple. I got one more option or chance left in this challenge, so I will try my best to keep pushing with it. But I've been having some pretty good success with this deck. I don't know if it's just because it fits my play style, or if it's really strong in the current meta, or it's just a good deck all around. But I hope that you guys have success with it. If you're gonna replace the graveyard, there's not too many options. Honestly, you'd be totally changing the deck if you did that. So maybe just another win condition, what do we have? We got Battle Ram, Ram Rider, Hog Rider, Giant. You'd really be changing the deck a lot. But X-Bow, there was a Splash NATO X-Bow deck for a while that was really good. So just another win condition. Again, totally changes the playstyle, but everything else in this deck works together really well. So another win condition in there, in theory, would actually work out pretty well. Alrighty guys, that is it for tonight. Make sure to leave the video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it. You can leave it a thumbs down if you didn't, that's fine, I totally understand. And if you're new to the channel, hit the little burger down there. Consider subscribing to the channel. I cover Clash Royale decks and balance changes as well as some other games all the time. And leave a comment in the comment section below. Let me know if you guys enjoy this deck, if you've had some success with it, or if you're absolutely terrible with it like I am with some decks. Let me know how it goes. Thanks so much for watching, guys, and have a good night.